Hello, college football fans. Welcome to episode 192 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined, as always, by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello, Husker fans and college football fans.
Hello, everybody. We are a father-son duo here to talk to you in 2025 about college football by college football fans for college football fans. We're back to our usual from-home setup, but it was fun to be together for the holidays. And today we'll be talking about the Nebraska Cornhuskers and their win over Boston College in the Pinstripe Bowl, as well as the results of the various other major bowl games, and of course the second round of the college football playoff. So we got a lot to get to today, a lot of games. We'll see how we both did on our predictions.
Yeah, that's right. I was thinking back about this. I'm looking forward to this podcast because, there were actually a lot of things to talk about, a lot of controversial things that happened. It was an entertaining bowl season from a variety of perspectives.
Yes, I think it goes to show that even with the playoff right expanding to take up more teams, that means there's kind of some less interesting bowl matchups because the best teams are in the playoff. But you still have players sitting out, opting out of games, and transferring, and all the stuff we've talked about with modern college football. But even still, the players that are there are usually excited to be playing. They like to be in the new cities. They want to get that final win on their schedule. You still see a lot of passion and fans traveling and all that sort of stuff. So, it goes to show there's still good in the world, right, Dad?
That's right. Exactly.
All righty. Well, we're going to go ahead and kick things off as per usual with our cold beverages. I got myself one of my last two Sapporo beers here.
One of your last two. What are you going to do after that? You're going to go buy another beer, right?
I guess so. We'll have to figure it out.
I am going to drink one of another variety of Four Peaks Brewing. I have a friend here in town in the Mesa area, and we met, picked him up at the airport, and we met at Four Peaks Brewing Company. So I'm drinking a Wow Wheat. It's an orange wheat ale that is a particular favorite of your mother's, but is a nice beer. I would say I would describe it as a summertime beer.
All right.
Here you go. Cheers.
Cheers. Yeah, I actually had that one while we were together, and I liked it quite a bit, so I can vouch for it as well.
Yeah.
Well, we'll kick things off with the Nebraska side of things. On the previous podcast, we gave our predictions for how the game would go, and I predicted that Boston College would beat us 31-24, while you were the optimistic one and predicted that we would win 28-21. And the final score ended up being a little lower scoring than that, but Nebraska pulled out the W 20-15. Now, to defend myself, I should note that at the time when we recorded that podcast, which was Christmas Eve, it had not yet been announced that two of Boston College's best players, their great defensive end and one of their top offensive linemen, would not be playing in the game. And given how close the game was, as it turns out, had they been playing in that game, I'm not sure we would have won.
I think you're probably right, although again, that game wasn't that close, right? I mean,
Right.
We were in full control of that game until some horrific special teams combined with, an error, on offense allowed them to get back to, make it competitive, right?
That's true.
Literally, they scored legitimately 7 points. And frankly, we missed on some opportunities. So the physical game, I feel like, was a much more dominant performance than what we'll ever.
Right. Well, that's what's interesting because Boston College got plenty of yards on us, but our defenses did a good job of bending but not breaking, right? We didn't let them get out of there with points.
Correct.
When you look at the total yardage, we had 363. They had 348.
Right.
In terms of rushing, we were able to hold them to only 47 yards, which is very impressive considering how much they like to run the football. But on the other hand, they passed that on us for 301 yards.
I know. And again, a few of their plays were these big plays that shouldn't have been big plays, right? Like the defense was schemed to be there, and then our guys just didn't execute, right? They were there to make the tackle, whatever, and then magically the guy is 25, 30 yards down the field. And a bunch of their passes were screens. So some of that passing yardage was really their running game, if you will, since they weren't able to line up and go.
That's true. Well, yeah, and I think when you look at some of the key stats on third downs, they were 6 of 12, but on fourth downs, they were 0 of 4, and on red zone scores, they were 2 of 5. So in those kind of tight clutch situations, when they were down in the red zone, that's where we were able to thankfully stiffen up and keep them from getting those points.
Right, exactly. That's good. I don't think we can take a lot from this looking forward because we had a lot of really key pieces that won't be back next year. But I think we can see that there's some talent on that side of the ball that maybe we weren't as comfortable with prior to the game.
Right. Well, and one of my major worries going into the game was how the defense would look, because with all the coaching changes, including the defensive coordinator leaving, and then also players on the defensive side of the ball transferring out and going to the draft and various things. We just had a lot of shakeups on that side of the ball. But to Jonathan Butler's credit, he stepped up and had them playing good. Like I said, we really were stuffing them whenever they tried to run it, just straight down the middle. They really couldn't get it done on us. Obviously, we did give up some of those big passes on occasions. But he did better than I thought he would. So that's a good sign for our future.
Absolutely. We still have some obvious gaps that need to be filled either by an amazing development in the off season or by securing talent through the portal. And we still have some opportunities to do that. It's an unfinished business kind of thing.
Right. Yes. And then in terms of turnovers, we were down in that regard 2-1 in the game, including a late one that really put us in a bad situation. But in general, like Dylan played pretty well. He was 23 of 31 on his passing attempts for 232 yards. And Ramir Johnson, who is from New York, where the Pinstripe Bowl was being played, had a great game, both running it and passing it, and just played very hard and clearly, was more motivated than usual. And this is like his 6th year and all that sort of thing. So that was great to see.
It was, absolutely.
And the special team side of things, like you mentioned, we did have some good signs from it, in that, like we made a field goal and we had that nice fake punt, right, that worked again, where we had Bushidi throw it similar to what we did earlier in the year, and it worked to perfection. But then we drove it down right to the goal line, couldn't quite score. It was 4th down, and we looked like we were going for the field goal, and then we went for a fake field goal, and it was very poorly executed, was stopped immediately. And I was sort of thinking, if you've already done a fake punt on that same drive, you can't go for the fake field goal as well, right? They're looking for it at that point. If you're going to do that, you needed to surprise them with it, outside of that context. So that was a big disappointment. And then later, the blocked punt late in the game that basically gave them a late touchdown to make it close was a huge moment. Can't
That was a huge moment. And again, you need to score there. That the bottom line is you can't get the 4th down, right? You've got to be able to find a way to make the yards to get the touchdown. Well, if we score that touchdown there instead of going for that fake, I'd have rather just lined up and ran a play if we were going to go for it on 4th down, or kick the damn field goal. But I understand, given the field conditions and everything, that maybe the field goal would have been questionable. But it would have been a short field goal.
Right. Well, and if I remember that set of plays correctly, my memory might be a little faulty, but I want to say it was like 1st and 10, basically at, right in front of the goal line. And we got like half of it, first 5 yards, like a Ramir run. And then we went to pass it the next 2 plays and got nothing off of it. And it's like, when Ramir had been, running really well that drive to get us down to that point, why do you go away from it when you only need 5 yards, right?
Right. And I get, maybe you can't run it every time or whatever, and you want to have some diversity, but I agree with you completely that you either come up with a different running play, or you fake that action and you do some kind of a movement where you get Dylan on a outside the pocket a little bit, and so he only has to decide on one half of the field, and you give it one shot. If that pass doesn't work, you go back to the running play. You don't throw it twice.
Right.
So,
but not only was this, our first bowl game since I believe 2016 or 2017,
yes.
And obviously we won it, which was also very nice. But it was because of that block punt and how close the game was at the end. We actually won a 1-score game, believe it or not. We didn't
Exactly
tense up, I should say.
But we did. We clutched up. See, that's a false narrative, in my opinion, because we seriously. I mean, we had what was the score? I'm trying to remember precisely. I mean, it was 20-8 or whatever, right? All we have to do is play football, play clean football. We don't even have to score again. Just play clean football, and we win the game there. But no, we have to do the stupid punt. We have to, understand in that last sequence, Thomas Fidone caught a pass, fumbled it, got lucky as hell that the ball bounced directly back to him, and he was able to resecure it. And then later in that same drive, Dylan Raiola makes a terrible decision and slides way too soon, and we don't get a first down that we should have gotten. If he had, understand it's last game of the year, you're not playing next week, you're not playing in a month. You get the first down. The hell with the sliding, or get there. Okay, get there so you can slide. If you don't think you can get there, then you dive, or you just run and you get the first down. That's just a poor, choking, playing to lose decision. So he does that. Then on the very next play, he does another slide, and then he gets up and does his little antics, which ends up translating to a successful penalty being called against Boston College, which was wrong. It was a bad call, and we benefited from it. But had we not gotten that call, they would have gotten the ball back again. So we can't even say we ran a clean, last 2 minutes to run down the clock and win the football game. And they still were within 5 points. They score a touchdown, they win. And so I don't think that doesn't strike any confidence for me that, we can win a 1-score game. It was a 1-score game because it was a 2-score game, and we allowed it to become a 1-score game, not because we were in a tough battle where it was a 1-score game for a long time, and we then made the plays to allow us to finish the game off and run down the clock. I don't believe that sequence gives me any strength in that. None.
Right. So to be precise, no, it's fine. To be precise, we went up 20-2 in the third quarter, and then they finally scored their touchdown with 6 minutes left to go. And then with 4 minutes left to go later, they scored the touchdown off the block punt that brought it to 15-20.
There you go.
So you're right. Yeah. And you're correct that the late hit or targeting or whatever it was on Dylan was
the late hit.
Right. Was not a good call. And we got the benefit of one or two calls that I thought were questionable, but then at the same time, there were one or two calls that I feel like should have been called in Boston College that weren't, so that sort of thing always balances out. But I can understand why a Boston College fan would say, "Oh, you guys got lucky."
Well, we would be saying if we were on the other end of it, that's for sure. And no, I no longer believe that plays balance out. I think poor officiating often leads to an imbalance of poor officiating. And so somebody is going to be damaged more by the bad officiating than others are. And more often than not, we have lost in that battle, not won in that battle. So the key is don't allow it to be close. We need to stop talking about winning 1-score games, and let's get back to beating people 45-7. So it's not an issue. Let's beat on some people.
Well, and I do like that, Matt's whole attitude has been like, this is the last time we'll celebrate, getting to 6 wins. And in this case, we got to 7 wins. So we're 7-6. But he made it very clear in his statements and everything that, this is not where we should be as a program. We're going to be better next year. but it is a step forward as an improvement. We finally have a winning score, and you could see on his face after the game was over and he was interviewed and he had the confetti in his hair and everything, how proud he was of the team, and like he called Ramir over to talk to the reporter and that kind of thing. So that was great to see.
It was, absolutely. And overall trajectory, trend for the program, absolutely fabulous. Really looking forward to it. And I feel good about the direction we're in. Are we about to compete for a Big Ten championship? No, we're not. We don't have the roster to do that. But we do have a quarterback that can do that. But we don't have an offensive line now with graduation. We don't have a defensive line that's going to be in the upper third of the Big Ten. And frankly, if you want to contend for a Big Ten championship, you need to have a good quarterback, if not great, but at least a good quarterback. And you better have a top third offensive and defensive line. And then that group needs to stay healthy through the season. If you have those things, you might be able to contend for a championship. And that presumes something I'm sure we're going to talk about more, which is that you have a solid special teams unit, which we don't.
Right, which we don't currently. But hey, a win's a win. I was very happy to see the win come through for us.
I really enjoyed the fact that I know you weren't able to join us because of the timing of the game, but we were able to. We were down at Hermosa Beach,
right,
at the Underground, which was a British pub in Hermosa Beach, and it was awesome. It was a lot of fun. So that's something you might have to consider doing, is going down there in the future.
I was working, but I was listening to the game on the radio, and they went to the cool Husker bar. And I was also going to mention, I know we were a little worried about, if Husker fans would want to come out to New York, but we traveled out there in pretty good numbers. It was definitely a red stadium.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it was nothing like it would have been if it had been a warm destination. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
So if we go bowling again next year and we go to a better bowl that is actually in the true South, I don't even mean like Nashville. I mean like Tampa, Florida, or Phoenix, Arizona, or something like that. Then you'll see, San Diego. You'll see an absolute overwhelming number of Huskers come.
Right. And then in terms of general Nebraska news, since we did our last podcast and after the bowl game and everything, there have been some more news in terms of coaching changes and player transfers and things like that. Guess we'll start with the coaching change, which literally just happened yesterday, which is that Ed Foley is out as special teams coach. I knew you probably cracked a beer to that one because you've been asking for that basically all season. And
absolutely,
his performance in the bowl game wasn't... if that was his moment to save his job, he did not live up to the moment there. We don't know who the replacement will be yet, so obviously we'll keep an eye on that and report on that once we know. But I'm glad that Coach Rule is highlighting that is a clear weakness on the team.
Yeah, well, he said that in his post game, and that it was going to require a complete overhaul. I don't know what's going to happen to Ed Foley, but unlike maybe some others who were given an opportunity to stay maybe in a different role, I don't even know if that was afforded to Ed. I think there's maybe more of a likelihood that that's just going to be we're moving in a new direction and you're not part of it. And that's appropriate. I totally understand and think that's fine. And now we'll hopefully do I've been a kind of a Bill Bush fan, right? Because I love him on the radio. I think he was an excellent coach. What he did in his final season at Nebraska, where he assumed the role of defensive coordinator and did a pretty good job for Mickey. I like him as a person, and I know that if he got a job at Nebraska, I think he's a guy that would, be very committed to the program and its success and work his tail off to be successful. So, but I want Coach Rule to do a national search, go find the best guy that he thinks he can target and get, and go get them. And if that happens to be Bill Bush, great. If it's not, I understand. I'm not gonna, hang my head about it.
Right. Exactly. And then in terms of players, I'm going to go through a bit of a list here. In terms of players who have announced they'll be leaving the program, We have our tight end Thomas Fedoni, linebacker Ismail Flores, and
Yep.
wide receiver Jalen Lloyd. Also, defensive back Kobe Bretz. I believe those are the main names I saw.
Yeah, the additions. Yeah, and I'm disappointed for Thomas Doney, and also for Jalen Lloyd. I really liked him. He is a great athlete. He's a potential NCAA track and field star. I mean, that's how fast he is, and he had some really good big plays for us in his time at Nebraska, especially the previous year when he was a freshman. So he was only a sophomore, and I feel like he could have continued to develop, but for whatever reason, either he felt that he wasn't going to be given those opportunities if he stayed at Nebraska because of the guys we were bringing in and the guys that were already in the room with him, or maybe he didn't like the new wide receiver coach after spending a little time with him and was convinced that he wasn't going to get his thing. He was running track for Nebraska too,
Right.
and so that's disappointing that he didn't stay because he's a Nebraska kid, if I remember correctly. So that's one of those which is part of the new reality. I unless the kids have, they have this window of opportunity, right? They only have 4 years for now. They only have 4 years to do their thing. And I can see the anxiety if you feel like, hey man, I'm now approaching my junior year and I don't see the path. If I don't see the path, I better get out and go now, right? And find a place where I'm going to get visibility. I need that for my NIL money, and I need that if I hope to advance myself either in football or in track or both. I don't know. I just wish they would stick it out. And that's just me talking old school.
Right. But then on the good side of things, we did get some transfers into the program. 2 from Kentucky, a wide receiver Hardley Gilmore, and also Dane Key, both from Kentucky. And then Georgia Southern linebacker Marquise Watson Trent, and a defensive back Andrew Marshall from Idaho.
All excellent pickups. Obviously, the wide receivers are huge, probably part of why Jalen Lloyd left. And they're guys that obviously our new wide receivers coach is familiar with because they're coming from the program he was previously coach at, and so they're familiar with him. They probably feel like they have a good chance. One of those guys, Dane Key, was a star for Kentucky, an all SEC type performer, and I think he only has 1 year left. The other gentleman is a younger guy. I think he's a sophomore, so he's still got a couple of years left. And so he basically is a 1-for-1 replacement for Jalen Lloyd. Not quite as fast as Jalen, but he's probably got more production, right? Or he has more production as a player than Lloyd had. So
right. Yep. Well, and we've discussed how, we went to the transfer portal for wide receivers at the end of last season, brought some in, and some of them didn't quite live up to the hype. So, hopefully now with the new wide receivers coach, these guys can rise up to the challenge and give Dylan some better targets this year than he had, or next year, I should say, than he had this year. That's the hope, of course.
Absolutely.
Yes. Alrighty. So yes, just to wrap things up on the Nebraska side of things, we talked last podcast about how big it would be for us to end the season on this positive note of winning the bowl game after our first time getting back to it in so many years, and we managed to accomplish that. Wasn't necessarily a pretty game, but a win's a win. So for recruiting and just the positive momentum, the practice we were able to get for the players in these past few weeks, all of that is a great step that I would say, I know we evaluated kind of where we thought the program was after the Iowa game. And I would say I would raise things up a little, half step higher after this bowl win. It's not like a huge step. It's not,
no, right.
that big of a deal, but it is positivity for sure.
Absolutely. And like you said, at the end of the day, it was about the practices leading up to the game. I mean, coach really took it seriously as basically another spring practice. And so I think it was important in how they schemed their their practice sessions, that they were getting lots of snaps for their younger guys and for the people that are going to be a part of this program in the future. It probably gave a little insight into for the players as to where they sat, which is what helped lead to some decisions about, am I staying or am I going? And so that's probably healthy also, although that doesn't always play out because the Thomas Fedone departure is not consistent with what happened in the bowl game or anything like that. Thomas worked hard after kind of being demoted a little bit when Dana Holgerson initially came in. One of Thomas's weaknesses, if you will, as a tight end has been he's not a great blocker. I think I'm being generous if I just say he's an adequate blocker. So, and he immediately kind of got demoted to third team as soon as Holgerson took over and had time to spend with the program. So, but then he worked his way back, and with Borkature leaving, he was back to basically, getting a lot of snaps. And so the future was bright for him, I feel like, and yet he still chose to leave.
Right.
So I don't understand the thought process some of these guys are doing.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about transfer portal stuff here in a bit. I got an interesting story there. But now talking about the bowl games, we predicted a few of the major bowl games as well as obviously the big playoff games, which we'll save for later in the podcast. Here were two. I didn't actually watch these two, but I guess they must have been very good games. In the Hawaii Bowl, Southern Florida was playing against San Jose State, and Southern Florida won 41-39 in the fifth overtime. And in the Sports Bowl, Pittsburgh played against Toledo, and Toledo won 48-46 in the sixth overtime.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, those ones were both pretty crazy. I'd be curious to see because, with the overtime rule change that happened a few years ago, right, the idea was to cut down on the length of the overtimes. And in terms of the number of them, like how many rounds of overtimes you do, we're consistently seeing like going to 3, 4, 5, 6 overtimes because they're short now because you just do the 2-point conversions. So in terms of length of the overall game, I would say it probably has been successful in cutting down the length versus the old overtime rules. But in terms of, the back and forth and how kind of ridiculous it can get, they're still pretty ridiculous. Right. But I still prefer this over the NFL rules any day of the week.
Oh, really? Now, why is that? I'm curious to get the reaction.
My understanding is in the NFL, the team that wins the coin toss, it goes first. If they score a touchdown on their first time in overtime, it's game over. That's basically that. That's the end of the game.
No, that's not true anymore.
Oh, did they change that?
Right.
Oh, good.
In the NFL overtime, if you get the coin flip and you score, well, you may be right. Well, shoot, I don't know the exact rule. It might be true that if you score a touchdown, it's over. But if you kick a field goal, if you get the ball and you drive down and you get a field goal, then the other team is going to get a chance to have a single possession and match your field goal or score a touchdown, right? So each team gets a chance at the ball. Now, I think if you get the ball first and you go down, you drive down, because that's a regular kickoff. It's not, starting at the 35 like the collegiate rule. It's play football, normal football. So you get a kickoff and you'd have to drive the ball, 70 yards to score a touchdown, right? Generally speaking. So if you can accomplish that, then okay, we're going to say you deserve the win.
Okay. See, right? So I just Googled it. It says in 2022, NFL clubs approved a rule that allows both teams to possess the ball in overtime in the postseason. So in the postseason, I guess no matter what the first team does, the second team gets a chance, even if they score a touchdown. But in the regular season, it's still the old rule, which I hate because I think the other team should at least get a chance.
I'm with you. I totally understand that. But it's still football, where the collegiate game overtime, we're playing some other weird game, just trying to separate the two teams and get it over with, right? And we're trying to do that, quote, quote, safely by minimizing the number of plays and things of that nature.
Right. But regardless, those were obviously two crazy games. Did you watch either of those two?
I didn't. Regretfully, I didn't. Nope.
Okay.
I don't know when that Hawaii game happened. But...
Right. In terms of time, those ones are always weird.
Yeah.
And then one that was quite fun was the Rate Bowl, which was Kansas State versus Rutgers. Kansas State won that 44-41. I watched the highlights of that, and it was just like back and forth, basically no defense in the first half at all. Like both teams were just scoring on each possession. It felt
Well,
like.
but Rutgers had a considerable lead in that game and kind of let it bleed away, right? Like it was disappointing to me because I thought Rutgers was going to win it, and then
They might have
Kansas
had a
State just
10-point lead at some point. I don't think it was any
Yeah.
bigger than that.
Okay.
Well, and KSU's star running back Dylan Edwards really had a great game. His speed is something else, man. Just watching those highlights.
Well, so does that ring a bell? Does that name ring a bell with you?
Uh-huh.
He's from Michigan. He
Right.
transferred to Kansas State from the University of Michigan. And never quite got his chance to be the star. Oh, no, that's not true. He was given the chance to be the starter, but he couldn't be a consistent runner. He just wasn't strong enough. And, maybe his vision wasn't as good. I don't know. But bottom line is he was good, not great at Michigan. They kept giving him chances because he was a very highly regarded player, very highly regarded. And people thought he was the next superstar for Michigan. And then he transferred, and now he's going to get his chance to be a star at K-State.
That's right.
I think he's got another year left.
Yeah, you're probably right there. And then two other interesting games, USC versus Texas A&M in the Vegas Bowl. USC won that 35-31. And then Missouri versus Iowa in the Music City Bowl. Iowa competed well, but lost that game to Mizzou 27-24.
Yeah, tough. That was tough.
Yeah.
That's not like Iowa to lose that kind of a game, right? A close game. So.
Right. And well, in that USC game, I will say, I want to say USC had like 3 turnovers in that game. Like it wasn't necessarily pretty, but they won it. And then another game that was like that was BYU versus Colorado in the Alamo Bowl. BYU beat them pretty solidly, 36-14. But BYU had 3 turnovers in that game. So frankly, the score should have been even more lopsided.
Absolutely right, and you're exactly right. Because I watched that game, and that was craziness. I mean, really, it should have been even more of a blowout.
Right. And then Louisville versus Washington in the Sun Bowl. Louisville won that one 35-34. Louisville actually had a 14-point lead with only 4 minutes left to go in the game. But Washington managed to score a touchdown, got the ball back, scored again with, no time left, and then decided to go for 2 to try to win the game and didn't get it. So Louisville won by 1 point off of that. And there was another game, a prominent game, where the coach decided to go for 2 at the end and didn't get it. So, it's one of those things where you look like a genius if it works, but if you don't, you look like an idiot.
Right. I tell you what, I was not in favor of that one at all, the Washington one. I don't know about the second one. I'm not sure which one you're referring to. I'm trying to remember all the bowl games I watched, but that Washington one, in my opinion, they had all the momentum. I get that you're thinking, okay, I'm just going to pull this out, but when you have all the momentum, I don't know why you don't trust your team to win it in the overtime, because you got it going. Your coordinator's doing well, all that. Why put it all on one play to win or lose when you don't have to with the rules the way they are now? In back in the olden days, I would have admired that, going for the win as opposed to just kicking the extra point and living with a tie. But since you got overtime, man, I absolutely am a believer that he should have given himself, that chance. So.
I totally agree with you there. The other game that came down to that was actually Navy versus Oklahoma in the Armed Forces Bowl. Oklahoma went up 14-0 pretty quick in the first quarter, so it's looking like it might be a blowout. But Navy's defense kind of stiffened up after that, and they fought back. I remember they had a really big run that went, 80 yards or whatever for a big touchdown. Yeah. So they went up to 21-14. Then Oklahoma finally got something going late, got a touchdown with no time left, and they decided to go for 2 at the end and didn't get it, so they also lost by 1. Now that one, you could maybe understand more because basically you've gone, 3 quarters basically without getting anything going on offense until this last drive. So that I can understand a little more maybe.
Yeah. I did watch that game, and yes, I agree. I think that one, that's okay. I'm willing to accept that. And, given who you're playing and everything like that, take your shot, right? So, yeah, but Washington should have kicked the extra point and gone into overtime.
And then this game turned out to be quite exciting. Iowa State versus Miami in the Pop-Tart Bowl. Iowa State ended up winning that one 42-41, another one-score game. I think on the previous podcast I mentioned I didn't think Iowa State had much of a chance against Miami because they were looking like they were the best team in the ACC until they lost late in the season. But
Right.
both teams, once again, kind of a game with no defense. Both teams were scoring back and forth on each other. Pretty exciting game. And of course, Miami had their quarterback Cam Ward get his record for most passing touchdowns in like NCAA history. He
Correct.
achieved that record in the first half of the game, and Miami was in the lead. And then he decided to sit out for the second half of the game. And and Iowa State, of course, makes the comeback and ends up winning. So I don't know how it was 31-28 Miami lead at halftime.
Well, that's not a comfortable lead, right?
No.
You're still in a battle.
Well, yeah, and Miami had 2 fumbles in the game, which cost them for sure. And Iowa State managed to score in the fourth quarter with 1 minute left to win that game. So yeah, it was a pretty crazy comeback by Iowa State. And I think Cam Ward has rightfully been, kind of on the hot seat with some of the media afterwards for like, how do you, play with your team for one half of football and then kind of abandon them and watch them lose, in a close fought game.
In this era that we're in now, with the no rules surrounding NIL and eligibility and transfers and all of that, the concept of playing for team is gone, in my opinion. And I that's probably the most crushing element of what has resulted in all these changes is that no one cares about the team anymore. It's about individual, right? Again, back to my reference, you only got 4 years. If your goal is to maximize your revenue, because again, how many of these guys are going to end up having long NFL careers? Yeah, they might get drafted, but how many of them are going to get drafted in the 6th through 9th round or whatever, and be just like a free agent who maybe hangers on for one season and then is out of the NFL? Well, hell, they're making more money out of NIL now than they're going to make in their time in the NFL.
Right. At least when they start off. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so then if you trim that to only the players that succeed, to have extended NFL careers and really make serious money, that's a small number of the total NCAA football athletes or NCAA athletes in general. And so that's what's destroying this whole, because now, even as a parent, I guess I look at it from a parent perspective. I'm not sure I could dissuade my child if I understood that their goal was to maximize. Mom and Dad, if you came to me as an athlete, Alex, and you said, Dad, I have a chance to make $500,000 for the next 3 years, and I'm probably not going to make the NFL, but if I play my cards right and I need to transfer because I've got this school offering me an NIL package that's going to give me, $350,000 a year for 3 years, what am I going to say to you? I'm going to say, absolutely, son, go get that money and we'll see what happens down the road. Forget the teammates. You'll find other players that you believe in and that you share values with, and you'll have that team feeling no matter where you go. They'll embrace you. So don't worry about that. Move on, right? It's a business.
Right.
And that's the component that I hate.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. Now we're getting into some games that we actually did predict, one of which was the Illinois versus South Carolina game in the Citrus Bowl. I predicted that South Carolina would win 35-25 over Illinois, while you actually predicted that Illinois would win that one 27-21. And the final score ended up being a little bit lower scoring, but Illinois won that one 21-17. So that's another score for you there, Dad.
Here you go.
Frankly, Illinois actually had a basically guaranteed touchdown. It was 1st and goal at the 1 yard line, and they fumbled it on their first play from that
Right.
distance. So they basically gave up a touchdown there. It was only 7-3 at halftime. So a small lead for South Carolina or for Illinois. But South Carolina went for it on fourth down in two different situations where they were like deep in Illinois' territory, trying to score, and they were stopped both times.
Yep.
And of course, there was this whole kind of freak out of the South Carolina coach over the Illinois coach, kind of seemingly taunting them about the substitution thing. Though I saw after the fact that what Brett Bielema was making the motion over wasn't so much the substitution as it was apparently there was a kickoff where the South Carolina player looked like he was signaling a fair catch, but then didn't, and kept running, and the refs allowed it. And I guess that's what he thought he was referring to. But either way, it set off the South Carolina coach and kind of rattled them mentally a bit.
Well, I think that's CYA by Brett. I think he was taunting him about the substitution thing based on his hand motion. But bottom line is, Brett was strategic in how he was managing substitutions, recognizing probably in their prep for the game that South Carolina tended to substitute multiple people between plays in such a way that it allowed him to utilize the substitution rule and limit the amount of time that ultimately South Carolina would have to execute the play. And he was able to do that more than once in the game. And that's why the coach from South Carolina got so mad. I think he probably, I don't know that it always led to him having to call a timeout or that they got a delay of game penalty, but I think it disrupted the effectiveness of some of those plays, right? Well, if a team is doing that to you, you have to adjust. You need to talk with your offensive coordinator and say, hey, listen, you can't be substituting so many players. We need to tighten up our package, personnel substitution patterns so that we are not subject to this.
What you were explaining to me was that, like, if I'm the offense, okay, I substitute 3 players, then the defense has like 6 seconds per player or something along those lines to then substitute 3 players of their own, and the ref will, stop the ball from being snapped until that time passes. And oftentimes defenses will just send out the 3 players all at once, kind of get it over with. But he was kind of strategically sending out 1 player at a time, using that max amount of time to let the play clock really wind down. Which,
correct.
From a strategic perspective, makes a lot of sense.
I agree. It's brilliant, right? It's nuanced and it's if you want to know the truth, right? It's not football. You're playing a game, but I don't know. I mean, Brett's good at that. He understands the game, and it's within the rules. But again, you have a right to be mad if you're South Carolina's coach, but adjust.
Right.
After that, okay, you got me. Don't let him get you a second time. Don't let him get in your head. He got in that guy's head.
He did.
So mission accomplished.
Yeah. Well, and I will say I'm happy that Illinois won, obviously, because it was a win for the Big Ten over the SEC. But in terms of momentum and thinking about them from a, conference rival perspective, Illinois is a team we're going to have to watch out for in the future years. They definitely got something good going there.
They do. And they're young, and they have a lot of people coming back. So they're going to be a talented team. Watching the bowl games, there's a lot of Big Ten teams that look like they have a good nucleus that's going to be coming back. The Big Ten next year, the top is still going to be the top. Ohio State, Oregon, still going to be outstanding. Michigan, I think, is going to rise back up and be a major contender. Penn State will continue to be very good. All that stuff is going to be true. But man, positions, let's say 5 through 10, dogfight of really good football teams, and who ends up, coming out on the positive end of a bunch of those close games.
Right.
Hopefully Nebraska will be one of those.
Well, let's hope so. And then we also, of course, had the Michigan-Alabama game in the Realia Quest Bowl. We predicted that one last week. I predicted that Michigan would win in a close one, 24-21. Well, you predicted that Alabama would win more solidly, 35-17. And that one ended up going my way with Michigan winning 19-13. It was a very rainy game, especially in the first quarter. It was coming down pretty torrentially, and I think Alabama coughed up the ball 3 times. And Michigan was able to go up into a lead, but some of those times they had to settle for field goals, right? They weren't able to capitalize as much as they frankly should have. And Alabama, managed to come back and was driving it at the end of the game, right, with the potential to win it. So it was still a dogfight. But, Michigan beating Alabama for the second time in 2024 because their previous game in the Rose Bowl was on January 1st of 2024. That ended up being quite a shock and quite a nice boost to the end of their season for the Michigan fans.
Oh my gosh, yeah. If you could have written a script going into Ohio State, the game week, right? You couldn't have written a better script for Michigan, that they would go out and beat Ohio State and then get a bowl game against Alabama and beat Alabama in a bowl game. That you couldn't have wrote a script for a better momentum moving into next season than those 2 wins. So, kudos to Michigan. But you are correct. I mean, the reality is, when I saw Michigan get those turnovers and then not convert them into touchdowns, I said, that's going to be the difference in the game. Alabama's going to come back. They're going to end up winning by, 4 points or 3 points or whatever. And the difference is going to be the fact that Michigan's offense was so inept that even when they were gifted these wonderful opportunities, they weren't able to take advantage of it. But the reality was Alabama never looked in sync or anything like that. Their quarterback really struggled with the elements. In fact, I would say their whole team, which I find a little bit ironic because the weather wasn't that bad. The rain was torrential. I've never seen it rain so hard, but that was a very temporary situation. It only lasted for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and then it was over. By the time the game was over, it was sunny and looked comfortable, right? But it seemed like Alabama just could not handle that water at all, and Michigan handled it. I mean, that's the difference in the game.
Yeah, definitely. Which is something you've often talked about, right? Having, in this case, it wasn't Alabama leaving the South because it was a game in Florida.
Right. Right.
But still, just the whole idea of, playing in different elements and stuff
right.
can kind of give an advantage to the northern teams.
I mean, torrential rain should be advantage Alabama, right? Michigan probably doesn't play in that kind of rain as often as Alabama would. Right, Alabama's probably a climate where those kinds of torrential rain happen more often.
Right.
But anyway.
Well, and I will say it was very sweet for us because obviously we wanted Michigan to win, and the fact that Alabama, had the claim to be in the playoff and then lost in embarrassing fashion to Michigan was enough that even Paul Feinbaum admitted defeat. I saw a quote from him where he was like, I was the biggest, Alabama defender saying they should have been in the playoff. I was wrong. I give up. So, this whole offseason has kind of been a bit of a, downgrading of the SEC's preeminence in college football, in that we've seen a lot of their teams lose as well as in the playoff, which we'll discuss here in a bit. And just going to show that there's more parity in college football than, the ESPNs of the world would maybe have you believe.
Well, yeah, okay. So this is going to have to be a whole nother podcast, but I'll just say this. One is that, statements about the SEC's decline are way, way, way premature. There's no doubt that this season they had more teams that were flawed. They have historically in past years. And I believe that is a direct result of the portal and the free transfer of these athletes, because they don't have the depth. The Alabama teams of Nick Saban, one of their key features was they weren't just even 2 deep. They had crazy athletes 3 deep on both sides of the ball, and they were able to retain most of those guys. Yeah, they would have a few leave, but generally they had them. They kept them. Right now, huge departures. Yep, I heard a stat that more than 30 players have left Georgia's team since the bowl game loss.
Right.
I mean, that doesn't happen before all this crap, right? It just doesn't happen.
Yeah, well, including the backup quarterback who was playing in place of their starter. He's gone now too.
Right. Exactly. Now, so my point with all of this would be the Paul Feinbaums of the world, and specifically ESPN Network, are absolutely guilty of ignoring and marginalizing anybody that's not on their product or program. And that's not unique to football. Trust me, they're doing that in every sport. So the Big Ten gets completely ignored and diminished, okay, by ESPN constantly because we are not one of their products. And to me, when ESPN is founded as a sports television network, that's what they do. For them to not be objective and acknowledge, the successes of other conferences that they don't have the rights to, to me, it just makes my skin crawl. And that's the subject of an entire podcast down the road.
Right. Well, and I'll just go ahead and mention now, since we're talking about it, in terms of the overall bowl records, which also includes the playoff games, the SEC is 8-6, while the Big Ten is 9-5. The Big 12 was 4-5, and the ACC is a rough 2-11.
Right. Yep. Well, and you think I feel like at least one of those ACC wins was a questionable victory too. And the Big 12 surprised me a little bit with some of their victories, and that's helped to some extent by the fact that they had BYU play Colorado, so they were going to get a victory in that no matter what. So I'm surprised that the Big 12 did as well as it did.
Right.
So kudos to them for outperforming my expectations.
I was just going to say that I agree with you in that if, say, next year, the SEC kind of bounces back and they have a lot of good teams and they do well in the bowl games, then the narrative will, flip once again. Everybody like, oh, the SEC is so good. This is not there's not anything to suggest that this is a long-term trend or whatever. And if ESPN gets the opportunity to, promote their product to the fullest extent again, they will jump on the opportunity. But I'm taking advantage of the moment we're in right now where, we can kind of tear down some of the obvious biases and get things on a more even playing field, at least for the preseason, going into next year, hopefully.
Yeah. Yes. I hope ESPN maybe is forced, because they're being called out so much, to do some self-evaluation, and maybe they're at the executive level where these decisions are being made, production levels where these decisions are being made, that they acknowledge that, hey, we've allowed ourselves to become an echo chamber. We need to make some efforts to minimize that in the future.
Right. All right. So now we're going to get into the playoff games. I predicted that Penn State would beat Boise State 31-21, while you predicted a larger win for Penn State of 45-21. And the final score of that one ended up being 31-14, so pretty close to my score. That was the Fiesta Bowl. And actually, Penn State was only up 17-7 at halftime, and Boise State came out and scored a touchdown early in the third quarter to make it 17-14. So they were very much in that game. But Boise State missed 2 field goals, which were crucial, and were down 4-1 on turnovers. So frankly, Boise State kind of shot themselves in the foot, maybe more than Penn State, won it outright.
Yeah, I guess I can agree with that. I think, though, if you look objectively and you look at the line of scrimmage and stuff, I feel like Penn State was clearly the better team. But I think Boise State is such a well-coached football team, and they were comfortable in their adversity and did a great job. They just never gave up. They didn't lose their cool. There were some points where it looked like Penn State could have just blown them out, and it didn't happen.
Right.
So kudos to Boise State for having that fortitude and being well coached enough to sustain that.
Well,
But
I should mention that one of those turnovers was like on the last play of the game, where they're going for a Hail Mary and it was, intercepted by Penn State. So that one doesn't really count too much.
no, it doesn't. Right.
Also, their running back who was up for the Heisman, Giandi, he had multiple runs where he broke, 3 or 4 Penn State tackles or was dragging guys with him, just going to show that he's the real deal for sure.
Oh yeah, he was really good. But he was getting beat up though too, right? I mean, they were hammering him and they were focused on him. And the point with that is, how good would he have been after a 12-game season in the Big Ten, where he's getting that kind of attention and getting that kind of physical abuse every week? Does he have the wherewithal to stay healthy? Right. And that's why how many teams in the Big Ten have a single running back that does all the work? Right. My one example would be Rutgers, who's, near the bottom of the league. Right. But most Big Ten schools, you need to have 2 or 3. Right. If you're not 2 or 3 deep at running back, your guy's not going to survive. And yet you look at some of these other conferences like the Big 12 and Scatterbo, or this guy at Boise, they're in there a lot. Right. They play a lot of snaps. They're the center of the offense. You just can't do that in the Big Ten and have the guy survive.
Right. All right. So then the next one we'll be talking about is Texas versus Arizona State. That game was the Peach Bowl. And I was the one who went off on a limb and predicted that Arizona State would win that game 24-17. Well, you predicted that Texas would crush them 48-21. And of course, that one actually ended up going into a double overtime with Texas winning 39-31. So I lost the overall outcome, but in terms of Arizona State playing well and making it competitive, I was more right than you were. Texas was up 17-3 at halftime and was looking pretty in control, but Arizona State started to make the comeback in the second half. They got a safety on Texas, and Scatterbo had a great little fake where it was 4th and 2, and they went to him to pass it, and he passed it for a touchdown. So that gave them a lot of momentum. They also got a TD off an interception, and Texas missed 2 field goals near the end of the game, which brought it into that overtime. You will laugh at the fact I was watching the highlights of that game on ESPN's YouTube because I only caught portions of it on the day of. And they did not show the controversial non-targeting call. They didn't show that at all in the highlights, even though that was a huge moment in the game.
What is your overall point with that description?
Well, because you mentioned how even the rules expert they went to on the TV broadcast said, "Oh, that's targeting," and then the the ref came out and said, "No, it's not targeting," even though there was forcible contact to the head of a defenseless player and all that sort of stuff. Right. So just leaning into their SEC bias a little more there, in my opinion. But admittedly, Arizona State, after they made that great comeback, and Texas missed those field goals, right? They had all the momentum in the world. They scored first in overtime and then forced Texas into a 4th and 13 on their chance in overtime. So you can't give that up. And then they completely, went for a blitz and just left this guy wide open, and Texas scored a touchdown to tie the game in the first overtime. And from there, they scored super quick in the second overtime, and it was kind of over. So Arizona State, had their chances that they missed, along with Texas obviously having several chances that they missed. That field goal kicker is thanking his lucky stars that they ended up winning that game. I can tell you that.
Absolutely. Okay, so the reason I asked the question that I asked earlier was that there are really 2 points that to be made about the whole targeting call. One is, the refereeing of it and the decision not to call that targeting. And I think that crew should be criticized roundly for it, because if that's not targeting, I don't know what is, right? Like, they need to change the rule. And again, I can reflect back over the years of the team that we follow, Nebraska, who got screwed by much less significant calls than that one, right? That were called targeting, and or the reverse of that, right? So there's this inconsistency of the refereeing. But then there's the second issue, which is the almost complete ignoring of it by the ESPN broadcast, because their product, Texas, why would we address this if it's not good for Texas? And so even within their broadcast, I believe ESPN is making production decisions that are beneficial to their product. Okay, that's the thing. They wanted Texas to win that football game. It was in ESPN's best interest, financially and as a institution, as a broadcast entity, for Texas to win that. That can be the only reason, in my opinion, having watched a lot of ESPN broadcast over the years, to see an ESPN broadcast group go to their local expert that's part of their crew. He says definitely it's targeting, and then when the call comes back to that, they don't go back to that expert again to say, well, what do you think? They didn't see it the way you did. What do you think maybe they were looking at?
Right.
You know what I mean? They didn't do that. Nor normally those two talking heads in the booth, even without the expert, would have been spouting their own opinions very vehemently on one side or the other. And they didn't do any of that. They just moved on.
Right. Whereas in the Nebraska-Boston College game, on that hit on Dylan, right, that got called for targeting, I do remember specifically that the announcers on the play that followed and the play after that, they were still talking about it, because they were correct. It was, in my opinion, even though it went against, it went in favor of my team, I would say it was a bad call, because Dylan slid late, and it's like, what is the defensive player supposed to do there, right? He was already going for the tackle. I actually agreed with what they were saying and their criticism of the decision. But in this other situation, when Texas is on the line, like you say, they don't keep talking about it.
Exactly. That is my point in a nutshell. And I totally agree with you. I think that the dialogue that happened in our game was legitimate and appropriate, because that was a bad call.
Right.
And it could have had a huge impact on who won the football game.
Right.
Given that we had all the other things that had happened, transpired just before that, where the momentum was all on BC's side, and the here we go again was absolutely in play for Nebraska, which is why at the beginning of this podcast, I said, I don't buy the Boston College game, that bowl game victory, as being some kind of we figured out how to win one score games. I think the exact opposite.
Right.
I think it's just more of the same. We just got lucky.
Right. But Arizona State also had a blocked field goal in the first half of the game that obviously would have been crucial when the game came down to that tie later on.
True.
And their star running back, Scattaboo, had a great game, both running it and receiving passes.
And throwing passes.
Right, and throwing passes like the touchdown we mentioned. Even though he was getting beat up for sure in that game, they were targeting him. And it was to the point that he still won the MVP for the game, even though Arizona State lost, which I thought was a nice gesture to his greatness.
Yeah, absolutely. That guy had an incredible football game, and he was spent. Like, literally, he was at the end of his rope in terms of energy and just a pure exhaustion at the end of that game, which showed that he had genuinely put in all he had. Yeah. And you got to admire that.
Definitely. And then there was the Rose Bowl game happening here in Pasadena, California. The rematch of Ohio State and Oregon, the one-score game from earlier in the season. These two titans of the Big Ten that everyone was excited, it's going to be such a great game. And then we start watching it. You and I were actually together for that one, watching it on TV. It ended up going to Ohio State 34-0 by late in the second quarter. It was a complete blowout. Oregon just looked completely flat-footed. Now they managed to score at the end of the second quarter and then score again at the beginning of the third. And you thought, okay, if they can keep Ohio State, from scoring on any more points, then maybe they have a chance to make a miraculous comeback, kind of like Georgia almost did against Alabama earlier in the year. But then, Ohio State scored the next time they got the ball, and it was like, all right, it's over. So ironically, the game that everyone thought was going to be really fun and competitive turned out to be the biggest blowout of the whole playoff.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. That's why you play the game. I think again that's going to bring up a conversation that I'm sure we'll have in the off season about just exactly given the circumstances and the timing of how these games proceed and the amount of time in between them. The bye week is not what it might appear to be.
Right.
I questioned that in previous podcasts. Even I think we even had a conversation about it, and I think it played out in a way that suggests that my concern about continuity. Every one of those teams came out flat. As it turned out, Oregon probably the most flat. Right? They didn't look like the team that we've been watching all season.
Right. Well, because even Arizona State, right, which we said, fought back admirably and made it really close, but they were pretty bad in the first half of the game. It was the second half where they made things happen.
Absolutely correct.
On the previous podcast, we predicted that one. I actually predicted that Ohio State would win 35-31, while you went 35-31 Oregon. So I came out on top on that one, with the final score ended up being 41-21. Oregon, once again, they scored again later in the second half, but it was pretty clear that the game was over in the third quarter, like we mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So that one ended up being a bit disappointing. I will say, to your point about the bye, I have more respect for Dan Lanning as a coach, because he came out afterwards and he basically said he refused to blame the seeding issue or the long layoff between games. Said they'd have to beat the great teams regardless to win it all. I'm not going to make excuses for opportunity. This is the road we had to travel. So I like that he's not blaming, the extra bye week or the weird seeding, where they had to play this really tough Ohio State team or anything like that, even though they were the number one seed overall. He just said we had to beat the team that was in front of us and we didn't succeed. And I respect that.
And that is the right thing to say. But at the same time, I think you can, as an observer, objectively look at it and understand, history of football and preparation for football games, that when you have, 3 weeks off, that can be too long for a team to stay engaged, to stay connected and really intense. And it might change the way they prepare. If they keep these bye weeks in the future and it stays at 12 and the top 4 seeds get a bye, how those teams handle their bye week, their time in between, is going to be different, I believe. I think that more of those teams are going to risk injury and go out and play an inter-squad scrimmage that's quite physical sometime during that off period to make sure that those guys stay physical and, intensely focused on their jobs. Because I think it's really hard to keep a team focused when you have that much of a layoff.
Right. And then, of course, there was the Sugar Bowl with Notre Dame and Georgia, which was delayed a day because of the tragedy in New Orleans. And thankfully, it happened the next day, and there was no incidents to note there. That was one where we both went with Georgia. I thought it'd be 28-21 Georgia. You said 28-17 to Georgia. But you recall that the bookies in Vegas actually had it going Notre Dame's way by like 2 points. It was close, but they thought Notre Dame would have it. And ended up going their way 23-10. But the game was, I think, closer than that score would necessarily make you think. Georgia had 2 devastating turnovers that were pretty deep in Notre Dame territory, along with a goal line stoppage where they were stopped from getting any points because of Notre Dame's defense. And Notre Dame got one of their touchdowns off of a kickoff return touchdown. So I want to say Notre Dame got one touchdown off of that, and then another touchdown off of an interception from Georgia, or turnover. So, and then their other points came from like 3 field goals. So really Notre Dame's offense wasn't that great necessarily in the game, but their defense played really well. And then their special teams came into effect with a substitution that kind of became the story of the game.
Right. Well, yeah. Just because it was different and unique, and there was some argument about rule interpretation and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, it was just a discipline or lack of discipline on Georgia's defense in that particular play, where that guy went off sides, knowing that they did this full 11-man swap out. I agree with you though about, Notre Dame's defense was exceptional, better than I thought they were going to be. But that also maybe speaks to the fact that Georgia hasn't been an offensive, powerhouse all season, right? So maybe that's just par for the course for where Georgia was offensively. But I thought they would be able to line up with their running backs and stuff and control the line of scrimmage a little bit, and they weren't able to do that. So credit Notre Dame for being able to, have the defense and the game plan to do that. But I kind of agree with you that Notre Dame's offense is a little bit suspect even now. And we got to keep in mind Notre Dame's a team that did lose to a MAC school, a middle of the road MAC school at the beginning of the year,
Right. Northern Illinois.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a 4th and 1 where Notre Dame was punting from their own side of the field, and they basically had their guys out there. The ref whistled for, play to begin, and then all 11 guys ran back, and they brought in 11 new guys. And there was 7 minutes and 47 seconds left in the game at the time, like you say. Then Georgia swapped their guys, and they were a little, offbeat, and then they got tricked by the play or the snap call, from the quarterback, went off sides, which got them the first down that let Notre Dame continue that drive, continue to kill clock, which was very crucial for them at that point in the game to keep Georgia from getting the comeback. And Kirby Smart complained about, the 11-man substitution, but according to the official rules, as long as you can't substitute more than 11 players while the ball is in play. So the key was that the center had not touched the ball at that point. So that made what Notre Dame did totally legal, whereas if the center had touched the ball, they could not have done that. That's basically my understanding.
Right. Yep, that is correct. That's my understanding of that rule as well. So interesting, classic. When coaches have time to prepare for bowl games and they have multiple weeks, then they can figure out stuff like that, right?
Right. Well, and it sounds like Notre Dame had done that sort of thing in the regular season as well. Like apparently they did some special teams trickery. So, hey, maybe we should be going after that guy as our special teams coach, although I highly doubt he's going to leave Notre Dame. The quarterback at Georgia, right, the second team quarterback who was the replacement for Carson Beck, who had been injured before this game. Like you said, it's already been announced that he is transferring away from the program. It was either that or going to the draft. I forget exactly what it was. But I just saw this comment that I thought was kind of funny about how this new world of the transfer portal, right, and how he's bounced around. The guy started off back in 2022 committing to Miami. Then he later changed his commitment to Florida, signed with them. Then by January of 2023, he left Florida and signed with Arizona State, played in 3 games. Then later in 2024, he left Arizona State, transferred to Georgia. He sued Florida, I guess, for something with his, transfers or his NIL or whatever. And now he's leaving Georgia here at the beginning of 2025. So this dude has just bounced around from school to school as like a free agent type guy.
Well, and the thing is that obviously he has had enough talent on film that people saw potential and they were willing to accept potential to join their program, because there's no skin off my back. If you've got potential, I'm willing to give you a shot. Right. And so that's why these coaches, because they're competitive and they're in a competitive business, that's going to continue to happen. And if the athlete is not governed by either good guidance from parents or loved ones or whatever, and they've got an 18-year-old's mentality, then they're going to make these kind of decisions because they don't understand the bigger picture.
And one quick thing I wanted to bring up before we get to our predictions for the third round of the playoffs is just talking about fake punts, because that was a little trend I noticed. Obviously, in our game with Nebraska, we mentioned our fake punt that was successful, but I believe Arizona State had one that worked, and there was a couple others I saw in the highlights I was watching from these bowl games where, it's 4th and short, somewhere around midfield, maybe, on your side of the ball rather than the opponent's side or whatever. Teams would go for these fake punts and get them and keep the drive alive. And that was just making me think, in terms of the risk reward of that or the percentage success rate. I wonder if it's something we might start seeing in the regular season more, just in normal games. It's in terms of like, if it's 4th and short, or 4th and medium, obviously you don't want to do if it's 4th and 10, 4th and 15 or whatever. But if it's 4th and a reasonable yardage, maybe it is worth the risk sometimes to go for it, and it will become more common. I was kind of thinking that watching some of these games. What do you think of that?
If you look and analyze the what do you call it? The book, so to speak, right? Of historic data, then I would say you are correct that people should do this sort of stuff because it can be successful more often. It's a little bit like going for it on 4th down just generically, right? We're starting to see more and more of that all the way up to the NFL level, because as the data has become more analyzed, right, they've realized that, going for it on 4th down ain't such a bad thing. In enough situations, it's worth the risk more than maybe historically coaches had done. So I would not be surprised at all if more of these kinds of things, these fakes and stuff, become more of a mainstream until people start stopping them. And I think you're going to see the same thing on the 4th down plays. The NFL teams that now have a reputation for going for it on 4th down. That stuff's all being analyzed and scrutinized, and I'm sure there are tendencies that are showing up on what plays they call or what types of plays they call on these 4th down plays, right? And so figuring out how to stop those will eventually happen with the defenses. And once that happens, then the percentage of success will go down, and then they'll stop doing it. And the same with fakes. I think that there will be a rise, and then a few years later, it'll decline again.
Right. Well, it was, this is a bit different, but it was particularly noteworthy in that video you shared with me and your friend Brian of Jalen Milroe in the Alabama-Michigan game. He had a very obvious tell in terms of whether it was a run play or whether it was a pass play in terms of where his feet were positioned. If they were a little offset or if they were straight on, you could basically tell if it was a pass or if it was a run. And he's another player who's now declared for the draft and won't be with Alabama next year, even though he had a very up and down roller coaster type of season this year.
Yeah. I again, I don't know who's advising these guys, but Milroe might get drafted. I'm going to say probably won't. And he's going to end up being a free agent. And he's an incredible athlete. He's got a good, strong arm. But he will have to soldier away as a backup quarterback in the league for a few years, and then at some point maybe be given an opportunity, and maybe he, at that point, with more maturity and more skills, he rises the occasion and becomes a great quarterback in the NFL. I don't know, but I would say a better path for him, if he was getting good advice, would be to stay at Alabama for his remaining eligibility, work through your weaknesses, get better at the craft of being a quarterback, and get rid of stuff like the tell that was shown in that video, and then prove yourself. And then the next year, maybe you actually get drafted.
Right. Yeah, I would agree.
These kids, they don't have the patience for that because they want it now. And they don't understand they're actually short-circuiting their opportunity to the big NFL payday.
Right. So in terms of our bowl predictions, you actually came out ahead this year, 4-3 over mine. So congratulations there. Now, of course, we'll be predicting the third round of the playoffs, which is Notre Dame versus Penn State and Ohio State versus Texas. Notre Dame, from what I saw in terms of the bookies, Notre Dame is favored by 2 points against Penn State, and Ohio State is favored by 6 points against Texas. Personally, I would be happy with that outcome. Obviously, I need Ohio State to beat Texas because we can't have Texas getting to the national championship. And then Notre Dame, Penn State, if Penn State wins, that would be a rematch of the Ohio State Penn State game from earlier in the year, which, isn't quite as exciting as getting a brand new matchup like Ohio State Notre Dame would be. So that's kind of personally what I'm rooting for. But what about you, Dad?
Well, yeah, my dislike of Texas is well documented in the history of this podcast. And so, yes, I will be a huge Ohio State fan in that matchup. So I'm with you on that. Now, Penn State versus, Notre Dame really impressed me. I really like Notre Dame's coach. I feel like he's really grown as a head coach since he became the head coach at Notre Dame. So I'm becoming a bit of a Notre Dame fan because of Marcus Freeman and what he's doing there. So I would be okay with Notre Dame winning that game. But I also know that Notre Dame is a team that's very physically beat up. And because they played that game a day later, they had less time to prepare than Penn State, effectively 2 days less, because Penn State played the day early, right?
Right.
So to me, that's quite significant, particularly as it relates to guys that got injured in the most recent game. Notre Dame came into this game that they played with already some serious banged up personnel, and the game didn't help, right? Where Penn State also lost one of their best players in their game, but it was 2 days earlier, and I don't know if that guy's been ruled out for the semifinal or not. But if he's out, that could be a huge impact for Penn State. But there's more of a chance that he won't be, right? Because he's got a few more days to resolve it. So,
yeah, no, that is significant. And then the Notre Dame Penn State game is at the Orange Bowl, while the Ohio State Texas game is at the Cotton Bowl. The Cotton Bowl, of course, being in Arlington, Texas.
Of course.
So it's basically a home game for Texas. So obviously, that's a not in their favor. By the other hand, they, as we just described, they almost lost to Arizona State, right, in a major upset, whereas Ohio State crushed number 1 ranked Oregon, is looking like, the best team in the country in terms of how they're playing right this moment. So in terms of that game, I think I'm gonna go with my heart as well as my head, and that I chose Ohio State over Oregon, and I think they can beat Texas too, even with the basically home game advantage that Texas will have there. But I think it'll be competitive, but I think Ohio State will win. So I will say Ohio State wins that one. Let's say 31-24 over Texas.
31-24. Interesting score. Okay. I agree with you. I think this game is going to be much more competitive than people think. Everybody's on the Ohio State bandwagon at this point, and Ohio State did look absolutely fabulous. But I think you're that people are underestimating the significance of the home field advantage that Texas is going to have. I think that stadium is going to be mostly filled with Texas fans. And I think the comfort that Texas is going to have in preparing for that game from a weather preparation standpoint and all that sort of stuff, being able to stay in Austin and probably sleep in their beds and practice on their regular field and just have a normal game week routine is way, way better for them. But I think ultimately Ohio State still wins. I just think it's going to be closer than I would like it to be or think it should be because of that home field advantage. So I'm going to say, but I think it's going to be kind of high scoring. So I'm going to say Ohio State is going to score 42 points, and Texas will score 31.
Well, so in terms of the spread, yours is actually bigger than my spread, but you just think Texas is going to score more points.
Well, yeah, and I think it's going to be a tight game, and then Ohio State's going to score late and produce that 11-point margin, okay. Right? I think it's going to be tough. I would love for it to be an Ohio State blowout like it was. I would like for Texas to be publicly embarrassed.
Well, of course you would. Yes,
that's what I want to see. I just don't think it's going to happen.
Right. And then in terms of Notre Dame, Penn State, I was considering choosing Notre Dame over Georgia, as I mentioned on the last podcast. I thought that was going to be a competitive game, and it turned out to be that way. Notre Dame obviously winning it. but I chose Georgia over Notre Dame. So I think this time I'm going to stick with the Fighting Irish, even though, like you mentioned, they do have some significant injuries to deal with. But I also, Penn State to me is a very good team, very solid all around, but nothing about them screams to me like great. Like, I don't see where the greatness is in any particular aspect of their team. They're just very balanced and solid overall. So for that reason, I'm going to say that Notre Dame wins against Penn State in another close one. Let's say that they do score some points, unlike maybe they were able to do as well against Georgia's very good defense. And so that they win that one 35-31 over Penn State.
Okay. I'm going to go with the maybe it's recency bias, but I look at not just the Penn State games, but the Big Ten games overall at the end of the season here. And I think a theme that has existed has been dominant line play from Big Ten teams, whether it's Ohio State or you're talking about Nebraska or you're talking about, you name the team, any of the bowl games. It seemed to me that the Big Ten was kind of showing that it was a league full of great line play. And when you face teams from other leagues, that difference really starts to show up. I think that's going to happen again here, presuming that there's not any crazy injuries or anything like that that would dramatically shift that magnified thing. That I am going to see a Penn State team that basically is able to control the line of scrimmage and wins that line of scrimmage and therefore wins the game. So Penn State victory, and I'm going to say Penn State's going to win it, but it's going to be Penn State's not going to score a lot of points, and neither is Notre Dame. As we pointed out, Notre Dame's offense didn't score very many points against Georgia. So I'm going to say it's going to be 27-17 in favor of Penn State.
There you go. Well, I guess I saw that trend as well, what you're talking about in the overall bowl games, but I'm making the bet that Georgia is different and that their defense was elite, whether it's the SEC or the Big Ten you're talking about. And so the fact that Notre Dame was able to score some points and that their defense really rose to the challenge means that they'll be able to score more against this Penn State defense that I don't rate as good as Georgia's, but we'll see if I'm wrong about that one.
I kind of agree with you that if my picks are right, you're going to have an all Big Ten final, which is not going to produce national audience, top flight numbers for watching that championship game, because it's a rematch from earlier in the year, and it's two conference opponents. And frankly, Ohio State has owned Penn State over that time. So a lot of people will make assumptions. Whether they're right or not is wrong, but they'll make the assumptions nonetheless.
Right. Yeah. No, I would agree. From the perspective of increasing the prestige of the Big Ten, obviously that would be great, but I'm more concerned about the national perspective of college football. So I'd like Notre Dame to win that one along with Ohio State. And I was just going to mention that I was happy that, these playoff games, were more fun than the first round, right? The first round, we had kind of a lot of blowouts. The second round, the Ohio State-Oregon one, ironically, ended up being a pretty big blowout, but the other three were all entertaining. We're all close, going into the third quarters at the very least, right? And the Arizona State-Texas game in particular was a real fun back-and-forth matchup as it turned out. And we had a lot of fun bowl games, as we mentioned, so I'm just hoping that we continue to have some good games here, and we get a fun national championship game to kind of close this out and put a good bow on this first year of the 12-team playoff, even though there will be a lot of consternation about, how the buys and the seeding will be allocated for next year.
Yep, that's true. We'll figure out a few things, right?
Yes, definitely. All righty. Well, this was a longer one, but we talked about a lot of fun games, and we'll be coming to you pretty soon to discuss what happens in the remaining games of the playoff, and of course, following whatever goes on with Nebraska and the wider world of college football. I know Dad has plenty of topics he wants to rant about in the off season, so we'll be getting to that as well.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, if you out there enjoyed listening to this podcast, you can email us at huskerpete13@gmail.com. You You also find us if you search for College Football Throwdown on iTunes or Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can leave us a rating or review there. We always love hearing feedback from the fans. So thank you out there for listening, and thank you, Dad, for joining me for this episode. Until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.